From Nine's wide world of sports, this is Stories of Origin.
And out they come here at Long Beach, California, for the very first State of Origin rugby league encounter ever played here in the United States.
We're in America. Have a look at this. Just remember it's, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Bugs Bunny, mate. We're here for a good time, right? And he goes, yeah, no problem, fat. And, mate, we pack into the scrum and he headbutts me. And I go, oh, my God, this is going to be the longest night ever. And he headbutted me every scrum for the next 78 minutes.
The podcast series available wherever you get your podcasts. Stories of Origin.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, June 1st. It's the scandal that just won't quit.
Detail today on the scandal surrounding consulting firm PwC. The federal police...
The top expert at Price Waterhouse Coopers, one of the big four consulting firms, helped the Australian government create a pioneering tax law that would finally crack down on multinational companies that were avoiding paying tax here.
PwC partner Peter Collins was advising Treasury on ways to tax the big global tech companies fairly.
At the very same time, that expert shared that confidential information to help the firm's own clients avoid paying that very same tax.
In effect, taxpayer-funded tax avoidance that...
This conduct, which one senator has likened to a major cancer, was revealed in January this year. But since then, we've heard bombshell finding after bombshell finding.
Meanwhile, PwC Australia's chief executive Tom Seymour has quit, and the firm's most senior global partners have flown in a desperate attempt at damage control.
Today, economics correspondent Rachel Clun on what you need to know about this bad deal of the century and whether the worst is yet to come. So, Rachel, this scandal broke in January, but it actually goes back a long way, doesn't it? 8 years to 2015, when the then Treasurer Joe Hockey announced new legislation that would prevent big multinational companies, which made hundreds of millions of dollars in Australia, from paying tax on those earnings. And the government had hired a top tax guru at Price Waterhouse Coopers, Peter Collins, to help create that tax. So he's now under investigation by police for allegedly sharing government secrets with the firm's clients. So can you please tell me about Peter Collins? Who is he?
Well, Peter Collins was the head of international tax for PwC Australia. He was even named the Tax Institute of Australia's 2016 Corporate Tax Advisor of the Year. Due to his expertise, the federal government asked for his advice and got him to sign 3 confidentiality agreements over a period of years about plans to bring in a new tax on multinational companies. So the law that Peter Collins was helping the government form was the Multinational Anti-Avoidance Law, and that's colloquially known as the Google tax. Essentially, companies like Google had people working in Australia on, say, an advertising campaign, and when the bill came for that work, it came from overseas, even though the work was being done locally. So the point of this law was to stop that happening. If you do the work in Australia, the bill comes from Australia, and the ATO can collect tax on that earning. And what it seems PwC was trying to do was to secure big clients, big tech clients, particularly like Apple or Microsoft, and advise them in how to avoid that tax law that they were helping to advise on.
Okay, wow. But this doesn't stop with Peter Collins, does it? Because there were recent revelations from a parliamentary hearing that have shown that a lot of people at PwC were actually told about these government secrets. Is that right?
Yeah, and I might just step it back a tiny bit. All the way up to this month, PwC has essentially been saying that this was a fairly contained problem. Only a few people knew of the confidential tax planning information. But this issue's been doggedly pursued by a couple of senators in particular through Senate estimates, Labor's Deborah O'Neill and Barbara Pocock from the Greens. I should probably explain what Senate estimates is for people who aren't as tuned into politics as some of us are. Essentially, senators get to question the heads of every government entity about policies and programs and any of their pet projects, really. And they also, importantly, have the power to compel those entities to provide information in a way that we as journalists can't necessarily get. And through that process, Deborah O'Neill managed to get 144 pages of documents from the Tax Practitioners Board this month. Those documents show more than 50 PwC partners and staff were included in email chains discussing the confidential information, including partners overseas.
So if I understand this correctly, we are talking about sort of the ultimate conflict of interest. You've got a firm that's helping the Australian government to make laws that will prevent multinationals from avoiding paying tax. You've got that very firm then helping their clients avoid that tax.
That pretty well sums it up, yeah. And it seems that PwC has made at least $2.5 million from that, according to reporting in the Financial Review. That was the fees it collected from clients, essentially telling them how to sidestep those laws. But they could have earned even more, winning future contracts from those pretty happy customers.
Wow. Okay. So to that Senate estimates hearing, there's been some major new findings that have been revealed during those hearings about this scandal. So can you walk me through what some of the major bombshells have been?
Yeah, look, it's been a really explosive couple of weeks in Senate estimates. On Tuesday, it was revealed in estimates that the scheme to avoid this multinational tax was just one scheme that PwC had come up with. We don't really know the details of the other ones yet at this stage, but that was revealed by the tax office last night. We found out last week that the Department of Treasury and the Department of Finance only found out about a lot of the detail of this scandal through media reporting and the release of those documents in the Senate. And that's what has ultimately led to the federal police to start investigating this issue. When the ATO was speaking on Tuesday night, we got a bit more of a better understanding of the timeline. So when this law was enacted in 2016, the ATO quickly noticed some suspicious activity from some companies, and they started investigating basically straight away. But that investigation was hampered at every step by PwC, and the ATO was also hampered by their own secrecy provisions, which meant they couldn't talk to other government departments or entities about what they were looking at and what they were discovering. And the ATO sounded really frustrated. They were aware there'd been a breach of government confidentiality. They knew about Peter Collins really early on, but they couldn't tell Treasury about it, even though he was still working with Treasury on, helping advise them on government tax. So in 2020, the ATO went to the Tax Practitioners Board, and here we are, 3 years after that, finally getting to the bottom of this issue.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because there's been reporting that PwC still has hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts with the Australian government. So how is that possible? And how could this revelation of PwC's betrayal of the government upend just how reliant the government is on these outside consultants?
Yeah, well, these are the really big questions at the moment, and clearly the government is super unimpressed with the behaviour of PwC and how they've handled the scandal basically from the get-go. One of the really interesting things we heard in Senate estimates last week was the Finance Department went to PwC when this first became known, asked them for, an explanation. PwC came back and said, it's not too bad, it's pretty contained. And then these documents came out that showed actually it was much more widespread, and finance essentially gone, why didn't you tell us that in the first place? So they've brought in a bunch of changes that they're starting to make off the back of this. One of the things is that they're making a new code of conduct for people who work with government. So people like Peter Collins have to basically abide by a new set of rules. Any PwC staff or partners who were involved or had knowledge of this tax leak scandal are no longer allowed to work on government contracts that are currently existing, and there are dozens of them at the moment. And probably most importantly, all government officials who make these procurement decisions for government departments have been directed to think about the company's behaviour and ethical conduct when they're awarding these contracts. And essentially, that's banning PwC from any future government work until further notice, until this whole problem has been resolved. But to your other point about the amount of money the government spends on this sort of outsourcing, it's huge. There was a recent audit report that found in the last financial year, federal government departments paid $21 billion for external labour. So that's consulting, labour hire contracts, all that sort of thing. To put that in perspective, it's about the same amount that the federal government spent on high school education in that year. The Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, is really interested in looking at what the government is spending on this sort of contracting. She believes the public service should be doing its core work of designing policy itself and not outsourcing that really core government work. So PwC is really on notice here about the future of the government contracts that it has. But it's not just PwC. All of these big consulting firms are now on notice, even though they weren't involved with this particular scandal, that they may not win so many future contracts.
I mean, it seems like the ultimate case of hubris, doesn't it? PwC won, I think you said, about $2 million or so from these dealings, and of course could end up losing hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, I guess, in government contracts. But is the worst yet to come? I mean, could we see a royal commission into this scandal?
Well, Green Senator Barbara Pocock has already said that she wants to refer this to the yet-to-be-formed National Anti-Corruption Commission. We have 2 separate Senate inquiries looking into this scandal. We have the Treasury Department investigating it itself. The Federal Police have launched an investigation, and PwC have launched their own investigation, and they've now promised to release that in full in September. So who knows what all of these inquiries will uncover in the coming weeks, months, but we can certainly expect this story to continue rolling for some time now.
So Rachel, can you tell me what's Price Waterhouse Coopers' response been to all of this?
Their response has been pretty slow, I think it's safe to say. In March, the then CEO, Tom Seymour, said maybe 20 or 30 people had been involved in this scandal. He revealed that he was also had received emails in relation to the tax leak scandal, didn't initially want to step down, but ended up standing aside as CEO when the pressure became too great. This week, PwC's acting chief executive, Kirsten Subbins, apologised on behalf of the company, saying the culture and governance of the firm was really clearly lacking. 9 further partners were stood down pending the ongoing investigation, and a couple of other partners, including the chair, have also stood aside. But it's important to note that no one's been fired over this scandal, and it was only this week, after that really scathing response from the finance department, comments from the treasurer, the finance minister, other politicians, that PwC came out publicly and apologised and said that they'd make public their own investigation. They've also so far declined to name the partners involved, saying that obviously if you're CC'd on an email doesn't necessarily mean that you have total knowledge of that. And I think we'd probably all accept that. But, there are ongoing questions and there's ongoing pressure on PwC over this. And I don't think that pressure is going to wane anytime soon.
Thank you, Rachel, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Margaret Gordon. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. This is Please Explain.
Hi, I'm Billy Slater, and this year I've got my very own podcast. So join me after every round of the NRL season and we'll unpack all the action. So go on, subscribe to the Billy Slater podcast and never miss an episode.
Ram Trucks eats everything else for breakfast.